Picture yourself standing in a crowded square where 10,000 voices merge into a single roar of agreement. Everyone nods in unison, applauds the same ideas, fears the same silence. Now imagine turning away from that square, walking into the unmarked wilderness where no path exists, where your footsteps create the only sound. This is not rebellion for spectacle. This is the ancient terror of choosing yourself when the world demands your surrender. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this terror intimately, not as abstract philosophy, but as the lived texture of his existence. Born in 1844 in a small Prussian village, he would become the most dangerous thinker of his century, not because he wielded political power, but because he detonated the foundations beneath comfortable lies. In January 1889, in the Italian city of Turin, Nietzsche experienced his final moment of philosophical clarity before madness consumed him. He had spent a decade in near-total isolation, his books ignored, his ideas ridiculed, his health deteriorating in cheap boarding houses across Switzerland and Italy. Yet in those final lucid weeks, he wrote with ferocious brilliance, as if he knew his time was ending. What drives a human being to sacrifice companionship, recognition, even sanity itself, for the sake of intellectual honesty? Nietzsche once declared that he was not a man, but dynamite, a force meant to shatter rather than build. But what does it mean to be human dynamite in a world constructed from the fragile timber of shared illusions? Can a single mind withstand the pressure of an entire civilization's disapproval? These questions are not historical curiosities. They burn at the center of every choice we make between comfort and truth. Nietzsche spoke of the person who must still have chaos within themselves to give birth to a dancing star. This metaphor contains a brutal promise. Creation demands destruction, light requires darkness, and the price of becoming yourself is accepting that others may never forgive you for it. Are we willing to pay that price? The Übermensch remains one of the most misunderstood concepts in Western philosophy, corrupted by mistranslation and appropriation. Nietzsche did not envision a biological superior or a political strongman. He imagined something far more radical, a human being who creates values rather than inheriting them, who stands as legislator of their own meaning in a universe indifferent to human concerns. This figure does not dominate others, but achieves sovereignty over the chaos within themselves. The Übermensch looks at the fragments of broken traditions, dead gods, and exhausted ideologies, and from these ruins constructs something unprecedented. Where does such a person find the courage to begin? Nietzsche's own life provides a brutal case study in the course of such philosophy. In 1876, he attended the premiere of Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle in Bayreuth, an event that should have been his triumph. Wagner was his friend, mentor, and collaborator. The festival represented everything Nietzsche had championed as the rebirth of German culture. Yet as he sat through those performances, Nietzsche experienced a profound revulsion. He saw Wagner's art as a drug, a beautiful lie designed to comfort rather than challenge. Within 2 years, he had broken completely with Wagner, destroying the most important relationship of his life. This was not impulsive petulance, but philosophical necessity. Nietzsche recognized that loyalty to persons must sometimes yield to loyalty to truth. His friends called him ungrateful, arrogant, mad. Wagner never spoke to him again. Nietzsche spent the next decade in obscurity, publishing books that almost nobody read, his ideas dismissed as the ravings of a failed academic. Why did he persist? Because he understood that the revaluation of all values requires not just intellectual courage, but existential commitment. What does it mean to revalue values? Nietzsche saw that morality as practiced in Europe was primarily a system of resentment, what he called slave morality. The powerless had declared their weakness to be virtue, meekness, self-denial, obedience, equality. They had painted power, pride, and self-assertion as evil. This inversion allowed them to feel superior, while remaining impotent. Nietzsche did not argue for cruelty or domination. He argued for honesty about the drives that actually move human beings, the will to power, the desire to overcome obstacles, the joy of creation and destruction. Can we face these truths about ourselves without the comforting lies of conventional morality. The Übermensch says yes. This figure accepts responsibility for creating meaning in a meaningless universe. When Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he was not celebrating but diagnosing. European civilization had killed God through rationalism and science, but it had not yet reckoned with the consequences. Without divine authority, who decides what is good? Without heaven, what makes life worth living? The Übermensch answers by becoming their own authority, their own purpose. This is not nihilism, but its opposite, the insistence that humans must create value precisely because none is given. Yet how many possess the fortitude for such radical self-reliance? Most of us, Nietzsche observed, would rather cling to comforting falsehoods than face the void alone. He called such people the last man, satisfied with small pleasures, allergic to greatness, hostile to anyone who threatens their comfortable mediocrity. The tension between the Übermensch and the last man defines our contemporary moment. Which will we become? Nietzsche wrote that one must still have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. This sentence appears in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, published in 1883 during a period of intense isolation. What does this chaos mean? Not disorder for its own sake, but the willingness to dismantle everything stable within yourself, to question every certainty, to endure the vertigo of having no fixed ground beneath your feet. The dancing star is not happiness or peace, but something far stranger, a creation that emerges only through the acceptance of inner turmoil. Most of us spend tremendous energy avoiding this chaos, building walls of routine, belief, and social conformity to keep the questions at bay. Nietzsche demands we tear down those walls. In a letter to his sister Elizabeth in 1885, Nietzsche wrote with stark honesty about his isolation. He described how his former colleagues avoided him, how his books gathered dust in publishers' warehouses, how he spent months without meaningful conversation. He was not asking for pity, but stating facts. This was the concrete reality of living his philosophy. He had chosen truth over belonging, and belonging did not forgive such choices. Modern neuroscience confirms what Nietzsche knew intuitively. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Studies demonstrate that exclusion triggers responses in the anterior cingulate cortex and insula, regions associated with processing pain. Our brains are wired for connection. To deliberately court isolation goes against our deepest biological programming. Why would anyone choose this? Because some truths cannot be spoken within the constraints of social acceptance. Because certain creations require solitude, the way fire requires oxygen. Vincent van Gogh sold one painting during his lifetime, lived in poverty, suffered mental breakdowns, and shot himself at 37. Franz Kafka published almost nothing, worked a bureaucratic job he despised, and instructed his friend Max Brod to burn all his manuscripts after his death. Nietzsche himself collapsed into madness at 44. His greatest work still unread. These are not success stories by conventional measures, yet each created work that transformed human culture, that opened possibilities invisible to their contemporaries. Is the course too high? Perhaps. These men did not choose their suffering as strategy. They could not have created otherwise. They were built differently, wired for questions that most people spend their lives avoiding. Nietzsche called such figures untimely, born into the wrong era, speaking to a future that had not yet arrived. Their contemporaries experienced them as disturbing, threatening, insane. Only later would their contributions become visible. But what about those who remain invisible, whose work never finds recognition, who die alone with their questions unanswered? Nietzsche had no comforting answer. He acknowledged that many would perish in the attempt to live authentically, that courage guarantees nothing except the absence of regret. The dancing star may never be seen. The chaos may consume without creating. This possibility makes the choice even more radical, to pursue truth without promise of reward, recognition, or even survival. This is what Nietzsche meant by the courage to be hated. Can you imagine choosing this path? Can you envision walking away from every assurance, every safety, into a wilderness where even your own mind may betray you? These questions are not rhetorical. They wait for each of us. Nietzsche wrote about herd morality in the 1880s, observing how human beings surrender individual judgment to collective opinion. He could not have imagined the algorithmic intensification of this phenomenon. Today's social media platforms do not merely reflect herd behavior, they systematically engineer it. Algorithms reward consensus, amplify outrage against deviation, and punish nuance with invisibility. The architecture of digital life is designed to produce conformity far more efficiently than any 19th century village ever could. What would Nietzsche make of a world where every thought can be instantly measured by approval metrics, where human worth is quantified in followers and likes? Research indicates that substantial percentages of people self-censor on social platforms, avoiding opinions they genuinely hold because they fear negative reactions. We perform curated versions of ourselves, editing out the uncomfortable truths, the unpopular questions, the thoughts that might cost us social capital. This is not evil or weakness, it is rational adaptation to an environment that punishes authenticity. Yet Nietzsche would recognize this as precisely the slave morality he diagnosed, the elevation of collective comfort over individual truth. Consider what he termed the last man, a figure satisfied with small pleasures, seeking only comfort and security, suspicious of anything that disturbs tranquility. The last man blinks and asks, what is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? He has forgotten that these questions once mattered. Does this not describe significant portions of contemporary digital culture, the endless scroll through content designed to confirm existing beliefs, the retreat into echo chambers where every opinion is validated, the reduction of complex thought to shareable slogans? We have created technologies that allow us to live as the last man perfected, never encountering a truly challenging idea, never forced to question our assumptions. The phenomenon sometimes called cancel culture represents a new form of herd punishment. Someone violates unspoken norms, and within hours a digital mob demands their exile. The accused may lose employment, relationships, reputation not through legal process, but through collective shaming. Nietzsche would note the resentment animating such movements, the pleasure the powerless take in destroying anyone who stands above the crowd. This is not to defend every cancelled figure or deny legitimate accountability. It is to observe how quickly digital platforms enable the mechanisms Nietzsche identified in traditional morality: the transformation of envy into righteousness, the use of moral language to enforce conformity, the intolerance for anyone who refuses to apologize for their difference. Throughout history, certain individuals have chosen solitude over compromise. Artists who rejected commercial success to pursue difficult visions, scientists who defended unpopular theories against academic consensus, writers who published truths that cost them readers. These figures are celebrated retrospectively, but they live their choices in real time, without knowing whether vindication would ever arrive. Today such choices become harder. The digital age offers unprecedented connection, but extracts a price: constant visibility, instant judgment, permanent record. To think differently now requires not just courage, but sophisticated resistance to systems designed to shape behavior. How does one maintain authenticity when every moment is potentially public, when every statement may be weaponized, when the architecture of communication itself militates against complexity? Nietzsche offers no techniques, no life hacks for authentic living. He simply insists that the alternative life as performance for an audience that will never be satisfied is a form of death. Can we reclaim interiority in an age of exteriority? Can we cultivate thoughts not meant for sharing? Can we become individuals in a system designed to produce replicas? The courage to be hated is not aggression disguised as honesty. It is not the excuse to inflict cruelty or dismiss others' pain. It is something more precise: the willingness to speak your truth, knowing you will be misunderstood; to live your values, knowing they will attract contempt; to create your meaning, knowing it may die with you. This courage asks nothing of others. It demands everything of yourself. On January 3, 1889, Nietzsche witnessed a horse being whipped by its owner in the Piazza Carlo Alberto in Turin. According to witnesses, he rushed forward, threw his arms around the horse's neck, and collapsed sobbing. He never recovered his sanity. Scholars debate what this moment meant: a final empathy, a complete breakdown, the culmination of years of physical and mental deterioration. Perhaps it was the instant when a mind that had pushed too far into dangerous territory finally shattered. Or perhaps it was the moment when someone who had spent his life analyzing human cruelty could no longer bear witnessing it. We cannot know. What we know is that Nietzsche lived his philosophy to a point beyond what most of us would risk. He paid with everything. Was it worth it? The question assumes a calculus that does not apply. Nietzsche did not choose his path by weighing costs and benefits. He could not have lived otherwise. This is what authenticity means. Not a decision made once, but a condition of being, a way of moving through the world that accepts no compromise with comfortable lies. Consider your own life as a work of art in progress, a sculpture you carve from raw stone. Critics will always emerge. Some will tell you the work is too bold, too strange, too different from accepted forms. Others will insist you are wasting the stone, that you should create something more familiar, more marketable, more likely to please. The question is not whether you will face such criticism. The question is whether you will allow it to guide your hands. Nietzsche does not promise that choosing yourself leads to happiness, success, or recognition. He promises only that the alternative, living an echo of others, is a betrayal of your singular existence. Perhaps today you choose comfort. Perhaps tomorrow you choose truth. Perhaps you spend your life moving between these poles, never fully committing to either. This too is a choice. The courage to be hated waits for no one. It does not argue or persuade. It simply stands as a possibility, terrible and beautiful, at the edge of every moment when you must decide who you will become. Will you step toward it,